Let's start by taking a moment to truly look at your hand. Go ahead, hold it up and wiggle your fingers. Pinch the skin on your arm. You feel something solid, right? You feel a boundary that defines you, your body. It feels permanent, like the same body you've had since you were a kid. Maybe just a little bigger, a little more tired, but essentially unchanged. You might think, this is me, this collection of skin, bone, and blood. This is who I am. But what if I told you that your intuition is lying to you? Nature is absurd, and the way you experience the world is nothing but an illusion. Think about it. Are you the same person you were a year ago? I'm not talking about your personality or your memories, but the physical stuff, the actual atoms that make up your hand. Do you think those atoms are the same as they were last year? They're not. Most of the atoms in your body right now, the carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, they were not inside you last year. They were somewhere else. They were in the air, in the food you ate, in the water you drank. Your body is constantly exchanging atoms. Every time you breathe out, you release millions of carbon atoms that were once part of your cells. Every bite of food you take brings new material to rebuild yourself. So here's the paradox. If the stuff that makes you up is always changing, how can you still be you? Imagine this. If I took a car and replaced the tires, the engine, the doors, and then every single part of the car over the years, is it still the same car? It's not just a philosophical trick. This is a profound physical reality. You are not your stuff. The stuff is just passing through. To understand what you really are and what it means to die, we need to go back. We need to understand what stuff really is. Hundreds of years ago, scientists thought objects were just solid lumps. Rock was rock, wood was wood. When something burned, it seemed to vanish, like it disappeared into thin air. But then science came along. Scientists like Antoine Lavoisier began carefully measuring things, burning wood in sealed glass jars. What did they find? When they burned a piece of wood in a sealed jar, the jar's weight stayed the same. The wood turned into smoke and ash, but the material didn't disappear. It just rearranged itself. This concept of the conservation of mass, nothing is truly destroyed, just transformed, is one of the most brilliant ideas in human thought. But if matter is conserved, how does stuff grow? Where does it come from? Think about a tree. How does it get so big? Most people would say it comes from the ground, the dirt. But if a tree were eating dirt, there would be huge holes in the ground. The dirt would disappear, but the dirt is still there. The truth is, the tree comes from the air. The tree breathes in carbon dioxide, a gas that's made of carbon and oxygen. Using the energy from sunlight, it breaks apart the carbon dioxide, releases the oxygen back into the air, thankfully for us, and takes the carbon to build wood. Now what happens when you burn that wood? You reverse the process. The heat from the fire gets the atoms jiggling. The carbon atoms in the wood snap back together with oxygen atoms, releasing energy as light and heat. The carbon returns to the air as carbon dioxide. This is how nature works. Nothing is wasted. The cycle of creation and destruction is perfect. Trees grow using air, and when they die, they release their components back into the environment. Now let's take a deeper look at the atoms themselves. Atoms are always jiggling, moving, vibrating. This is the foundation of everything. The more heat something gets, the faster the atoms jiggle. When something's cold, the jiggling slows down, but they never stop. These atoms are held together by electric forces. If you ever thought you were actually touching anything, think again. When you press your hand on a table, you aren't really touching the table. Your hand and the table's atoms are mostly empty space. What really happens is that the electrons in your atoms are repelling the electrons in the table's atoms. You've never really touched anything in your life. You've only ever felt the electromagnetic force pushing back against you. And here's where it gets strange. You, just like everything else, are a process, not a solid object. Imagine you're standing on a beach watching the ocean. A wave forms far out, rolls in, gets bigger, and finally crashes onto the shore. But did the water from way out in the ocean travel all the way to the beach? No. If you put a drop of dye in the water, it wouldn't travel to the shore with the wave. Instead, the water just moves in a circular motion, up and down. The wave isn't the water, it's the pattern the water makes. You are not the water. You are the wave. You are a pattern of energy, constantly changing. Atoms come and go, But the pattern of you, the collection of rules, processes, and structures, remains. Your body is like a wave that has been formed from a series of rules and patterns, and that wave, your pattern, is not static. It exists in the geometry of space and time, a continuous event in the fabric of the universe. Let's think about where these atoms come from. The simple atoms formed during the Big Bang, hydrogen and a little helium, were the building blocks of everything. But the atoms in your body today are not just hydrogen. They're made of heavier elements like carbon, calcium, and iron. Where did those come from? They were created in the hearts of stars, in intense heat and pressure. The star burns these elements into heavier ones, but when the star dies, the explosion releases these elements into the universe. These atoms traveled across space, eventually forming the Earth, and then becoming part of you. All the carbon, the calcium, the iron, and the oxygen in your body came from the explosions of stars. You are made of star stuff. The atoms that make you up have been through a cosmic journey, and they've become part of a process that is far bigger than you could ever imagine. This brings us to the idea of life and death. What happens when we die? We must look at entropy, the second law of thermodynamics. Nature moves from order to disorder. Imagine a perfectly ordered deck of cards. As you shuffle it, the cards become disorganized. The universe is the same. It is constantly trying to shuffle everything. The wave of life, your life, is a state of low entropy, highly organized. But eventually, the universe's natural tendency to disorder takes over. You fight this entropy by consuming energy, food, air, but eventually your energy runs out. When you die, your body's pattern breaks down. But remember, nothing is truly destroyed. The atoms, the energy, they don't vanish. They return to the universe to be used again. So when you die, you're not really gone. The pieces of you continue. The carbon in your body will go back into the air and maybe become part of a tree. Your water will evaporate and become part of a storm. The universe is a cycle of creation and destruction. Life and death are just parts of this ongoing cycle. You are not just a human body on Earth. You are the universe acting out its story. Through you, the universe experiences itself. Your atoms were forged in stars, and when you pass, they will return to the cosmos, continuing the cycle. Life may be temporary, but your atoms, the very building blocks of your existence, are eternal. This perspective changes everything. So, next time you wonder about life, about death, remember, you are star stuff, caught in an infinite dance across the cosmos. Let's take a moment to examine your hand. Hold it up, wiggle your fingers, and feel the skin on your arm. What you're feeling may seem solid, like a permanent boundary that defines you. It feels like it's been with you since you were a child, maybe a bit bigger or more worn, but essentially unchanged. You might think, this is me, this body I live in. But what if I told you that your intuition is wrong? What if the way you experience the world is an illusion? Now let me ask you, are you the same person you were last year? I don't mean your memories or your personality, but the actual physical matter that makes up your body. Do you think the atoms in your body are the same as last year? The truth is, they aren't. The carbon, oxygen, and nitrogen atoms in your body right now weren't inside you a year ago. They were elsewhere, perhaps in the air, the food you ate, or the water you drank. Your body is constantly swapping atoms. Every time you breathe out, you're exhaling millions of atoms of carbon that used to be part of you. When you eat, you're bringing in new materials to build yourself up. So here's the paradox. If the stuff that makes you up is constantly changing, how can you still be you? Imagine you have a car. Over the years, you replace the tires, the engine, the doors, and eventually every single part of the car. Is it still the same car? It may look the same, but physically, it's all new parts. This is not just a philosophical question. It's a profound reality. You are not the same physical stuff all the time. What you are is the pattern. The stuff just passes through you. To understand this, we need to go back in time and see how humans figured out what stuff even is. Hundreds of years ago, people thought objects were solid lumps. Rocks were rocks. Wood was wood. When something burned, it seemed to disappear, vanish into thin air. But then scientists began measuring things more carefully. Antoine Lavoisier, in the 18th century, did an experiment where he burned wood in a sealed jar. He measured the weight of the jar before and after. What he discovered was groundbreaking. The jar's weight remained the same. The wood was gone, but its atoms hadn't disappeared. They had just rearranged themselves into smoke, ash, and gas. This idea of the conservation of mass, matter cannot be destroyed, only rearranged, is one of the cornerstones of science. But if matter is permanent, then how does it grow? Where does the material come from? Think about a tree. A towering oak can weigh thousands of pounds. Where does it get all that material? Most people would say, from the dirt, but that's not quite right. If a tree ate dirt to get big, we would see massive holes in the ground. But the dirt is still there, so where does the tree come from? The answer is, the tree comes from the air. It takes carbon dioxide from the air, splits it into carbon and oxygen using the energy from sunlight, and releases the oxygen back into the air. The carbon is used to build wood. The solid, heavy trunk of the tree is just carbon from the air, locked together with water from the ground. When you chop that tree and burn it in a fire, you're essentially reversing the process. The heat causes the atoms in the wood to jolt around so violently that they break apart. The carbon atoms in the wood recombine with oxygen atoms in the air, releasing energy as light and heat. The cycle completes, and the carbon returns to the air as carbon dioxide. The energy that powered the tree is released back into the environment. Nothing is lost in the process. Nature is the ultimate recycler. Now let's get deeper. Everything is made of atoms, and these atoms are constantly jiggling around. If something gets hot, its atoms jiggle faster. If something cools down, the jiggling slows. But the atoms never really stop moving. These atoms are held together by electric forces. Electrons repel each other. When you press your hand on a table, it doesn't go through the table because the electrons in your hand push against the electrons in the table. You've never actually touched anything. You've only ever felt the electric repulsion between atoms. So, if you're just a collection of atoms held together by invisible forces, what exactly are you? Imagine you're standing on a beach, watching a wave form far out in the ocean. The wave moves forward, gets bigger, and finally crashes onto the sand. But did the water from out in the ocean actually travel all the way to the shore? No. If you put a drop of dye in the wave, it wouldn't reach the beach. The water just moves in a circular motion. It's not the water itself that travels, it's the pattern of the wave. In a similar way, you are not the water. You are the wave. You're a complex pattern of information, a set of rules and structures that interact with the environment. The atoms in your body aren't permanent. They come and go. They're just the medium. Your existence is like a wave, constantly moving, constantly changing, but always part of a larger structure. And this isn't just a metaphor, it's the actual reality of how life works. Let's zoom out and think about where the atoms in your body came from. They didn't just come from the Big Bang, they were created in the hearts of stars. Stars are the factories that create heavier elements like carbon, oxygen, and iron. When stars die, they explode in a supernova, scattering those elements into space. These elements eventually form new stars and planets, including Earth. The atoms in your body were forged in the heart of a star, billions of years ago. This is what you are, star stuff, the remnants of stars that lived and died before Earth even existed. And when you die, those atoms don't just disappear, they're recycled into the universe. They might become part of a tree, a mountain, or another living being. This cycle of life and death, creation and destruction, is the ongoing dance of the universe. Life is not about holding on to the atoms. It's about the wave, the process, the dance of energy that never stops. Let's take a moment to really think about what it means to be you. Imagine standing in front of a mirror, looking at yourself and feeling your hand or tapping your skin. You feel something solid, right? Something that feels like a boundary. Your body, yourself. But what if I told you that this perception of yourself, this feeling of permanence, is a complete illusion? The truth is, everything you think you know about your body is built on a foundation that nature itself defies. Let's start with something fundamental. Are you the same person you were a year ago? Not in terms of memories or experiences, but the actual physical components of your body. Do you think the atoms making up your hand right now are the same ones that existed in your body a year ago? They're not. In fact, most of the atoms in your body have been replaced by new ones. The oxygen you breathe, the food you eat, even the air you exhale, every part of you is in a constant state of flux. Your body is in a perpetual cycle of exchanging atoms. Every time you breathe out, you exhale millions of carbon atoms, and with every meal, you take in new atoms to rebuild yourself. Now here's the real mind bender. If all the physical stuff that makes up your body is constantly changing, how can you still be you? If I took a car, replaced the tires, the engine, the doors, and every single part of it over the years, would it still be the same car? It might look the same, but physically, it's entirely different. And here's the kicker. This isn't just some philosophical trick. This is a physical reality. You're not the stuff that makes up your body. You're the process, the pattern that the stuff follows. To understand this on a deeper level, let's take a step back and look at how we discovered what matter really is. For centuries, people thought objects were just solid lumps. Wood was wood and rocks were rocks. But then science emerged, and things started to change. Antoine Lavoisier, one of the founding figures of modern chemistry, conducted experiments that would reshape our understanding of matter. He burned wood inside a sealed jar, weighed it before and after, and discovered something extraordinary. The weight didn't change. The wood turned into smoke and ash, but the atoms that made it up didn't disappear. They merely rearranged. This idea, known as the conservation of mass, is one of the most important principles in science. Matter cannot be destroyed, only transformed. But here's where it gets interesting. If matter is permanent, how do things grow? Where does the new matter come from? Imagine a tree growing. A giant oak weighs thousands of pounds, but where did that material come from? Most people will tell you it comes from the ground, from the dirt. But if that were true, every tree would have to be surrounded by a massive hole in the ground where the dirt has been consumed. Yet, the dirt remains intact. So where does the tree get its mass from? It comes from the air. Yes, you heard that right. The tree is made from air. The tree takes in carbon dioxide, CO2, from the atmosphere, splits it into carbon and oxygen using sunlight's energy, and releases oxygen back into the air. The carbon, however, is used to form wood. The solid, heavy trunk of the tree is made from carbon from the air and water from the ground. Now, when you chop the tree down and burn it, you're actually reversing the process. The heat from the fire breaks apart the atoms in the wood, causing the carbon atoms to recombine with the oxygen atoms in the air. This releases energy, which we see as light and heat, and the carbon dioxide is released back into the air. It's a perfect cycle of recycling, where nothing is truly lost. Nature does this effortlessly. It creates and destroys over and over again with no waste. This understanding brings us to a critical realization. You, just like the tree, are part of this constant recycling process. You're made of atoms that came from stars. In fact, all of the elements that make up your body, carbon, oxygen, iron, were forged in the cores of ancient stars. These stars burned hot and bright for billions of years, creating the heavier elements needed for life. But when those stars died, they exploded in violent supernovae, spreading these elements across space. These elements eventually came together, forming the Earth, the plants, and eventually us. The atoms in your body, carbon in your muscles, iron in your blood, came from long-dead stars. You are literally made from stardust. Every atom that's inside you has traveled through space and time, passed through different stages of the universe's evolution, and eventually ended up in your body. These atoms are ancient, and they carry the history of the cosmos within them. But what does this mean for the process of life and death? When you die, your body doesn't just cease to exist. The atoms that made you up don't disappear. They return to the universe, just as they came. The carbon in your body may end up in the soil, where it could be taken up by a plant. It might become part of the atmosphere, or even part of another living creature. The cycle continues as the universe constantly reconfigures itself. So, while we might fear death and the idea of our bodies breaking down, it's important to remember that nothing truly disappears. The atoms that made up your body will live on, continuing to play their part in the cosmic cycle. What we experience as life is a temporary pattern, a brief moment in the ongoing dance of the universe. Have you ever stopped to think about what you truly are? When you look at yourself in the mirror, you see a solid body, right? But that body, the physical stuff that makes you, is constantly changing. Every year, most of the atoms in your body are replaced. You're not the same person physically that you were a year ago. Your body is in a constant state of flux, taking in new atoms and getting rid of old ones. So if you're constantly changing, what makes you you? The truth is, you're not just a collection of atoms. You're a pattern, a process. Atoms are recycled. The carbon in your body, the oxygen in your lungs, and the iron in your blood all came from stars that exploded long ago. You're made of stardust, and when you die, those same atoms don't disappear. They're released back into the universe, ready to form new patterns. This cycle is nature's brilliance. It's the ultimate recycling system. So, when you feel like you're just a solid, permanent entity, remember, you are a wave, not the water. You are a part of an ongoing cosmic process. Life, death, and everything in between is one big, never-ending dance.